everyone, it's Sevy. Most of you know me as a Genshin Impact focused content creator, so many people have been asking me what I think of Tower of Fantasy so far. So this is my compilation of my thoughts, as fresh as they are. Technically, I've had more than one day of playing since I also had earlier access to test the game and make my first guide on it, but in terms of the official global release, I've only had a little over a day of playing the game, so take this strictly as my very early and honest impressions. I'm planning to roll these impressions out in segments, like my 1 or 2 weeks later thoughts might be the next milestone, or maybe 1 month later, and I'll elaborate more on what I say here. And who knows, maybe I'll have a half year or 1 year later video eventually if I'm still playing the game. So big disclaimer that I'll mainly be taking the standpoint of a Genshin player since, again, if you're new to my channel, that is my main content and that is my main audience. Alright, starting off with the combat mechanics. I still prefer Genshin Impact's elemental reaction system. I like that layer of interaction and synergy. In Tower of Fantasy, elements seem to be mainly about matching against enemy weaknesses, but I prefer Genshin's system where they actually react with one another, which is the main source of complexity, I think, of Genshin's combat. Especially since Sumeru is very near, we're about to add yet another layer of elemental reactions to discover, play with, create interesting and strong combos with, help find new relevance in older characters. A level of sophistication like that is hard to beat. As of now, in Tower of Fantasy, I'm more concerned about balancing shield breaking and DPS weapons and finding the ones whose playstyles I like. I think that, since PvP in Tower of Fantasy is optional, I'm not yet too pressured to go by meta, and I'm approaching the game very casually combat-wise. But there are already characters I prefer more than the others because they feel better to play, mechanically speaking. Like with the Terminator. While she might be useful as a co-op turret, I just don't like the Gatling gun and stationary turret mode. But with Samir, aside from being super hot, I really like that she's a very mobile gunner. Tower of Fantasy offers a lot of variety in its weapons and playstyles, which I think many people can appreciate, and there's also more mobility to play with, such as aerial combat, which lends even more variety to how you can play with your weapons. So this is something you'll really have to try for yourself and see if it suits your gameplay preferences. Now when it comes to the visual, artistic, and musical direction, I think I already have sufficient basis to say I definitely prefer Genshin's more. Visual style is of course subjective, but Genshin's graphics are more pleasing and polished to my eye and to my taste. Genshin goes through insane lengths to make beautiful musical scores and motifs. So far, I'm waiting for Tower of Fantasy to hit me with those memorable compositions, but it's hard to beat even Genshin's loading screen music. That's not to say Tower of Fantasy's visual and musical style are bad, but I think they're really there to set a mood rather than to be a highlight feature of the game. Now, I'm not as attached to the characters in Tower of Fantasy yet as I was in Genshin, although it is very nice to see some familiar Genshin voice actors in this game. Yes, I have been playing Genshin for a long time now, but I remember that starting my Genshin experience with very memorable characters and plot was a huge thing, while Tower of Fantasy doesn't seem to hit those same notes just yet. I think this is in large part because the Tower of Fantasy story beginning makes you interact with mostly generic NPCs instead of characters you're supposed to pull. So it's like I'm getting attached faster to these NPCs rather than the SRs and SSRs. The Simulacra actually have their own story chapters you can play, so I'm interested to try those as I unlock more of them. The overarching story is slowly being unlocked day by day, so it's too early to tell how emotionally impactful it will be for me. I want to expound more on this in a later video so I can have better points of comparison about the world building and plot development. However, I'm not really setting high expectations for the story because of what else Tower of Fantasy is trying to set itself apart with, which is its MMO and co-op aspects. Now I want to talk about the highlight features of Tower of Fantasy, and the biggest one, or one of the biggest ones, is definitely that MMO aspect. I get more incentive now to co-op, and it's easier to co-op. I mean, you already have people running around in the world that you're exploring. There's dungeons and raids that you can do in co-op, and these look promising. And then there's a crew and team system that's helpful for building an in-game community and having more in-game interactions with people you already know. I'm looking forward to the prospect of your teammates having to be very conscious of assigning roles like tank, support, DPS when tackling difficult content, and that will require more team coordination. I also enjoy running into random people in the world that I'm in, observing what they're up to, who they're fighting. It may not be your cup of tea, but I think it's a nice change of pace from the primarily solo Genshin life. There are also very generous rewards in Tower of Fantasy. Now, this is to be expected at the start since they are trying to get everyone to play, and the pity system is also, in my opinion, more generous on at least this gold nucleus banner. For example, I already got 2 SSRs before hitting the hard pity. I'm on the way to get that hard pity, getting a 3rd SSR, and then I'm on the way to the SSR selector box. So it's nice that I already have these shiny things without spending. Time will tell if there will be a major power spike that'll heavily affect my enjoyment with what I have as a free-to-play, or maybe it's really centered on the PvP and high-level activities where having better characters or more refinements will incentivize spending. However, one big difference I feel so far is that this game makes it very easy to make smurf and reroll accounts. The fact that you're basically guaranteed an SSR within the first 30 to 60 minutes of grinding is a pretty heavy contrast to Genshin. This at least gives you a bit more control within Tower of Fantasy of who your starting main characters, or in this case weapons, will be. If you so wish to take advantage of rerolling, it comes with very little risk and time investment. So far, I can see myself playing this as my downtime game from Genshin for the weeks to come, and whenever there are slow weeks between versions. Currently, story and maximum level progress is limited per day, and this is fine with me. It keeps some players from being too ahead of others. It also helps as a reminder for me to touch grass even when I'm already juggling 2 gacha games. So, to close this, I want to touch on the Genshin killer moniker it's received. In my opinion, it's really not a Genshin killer, and I don't think it should be, mainly because the MMO aspect sets it apart enough from Genshin in a fundamental way that it doesn't feel like it's necessarily competing for the exact same role. It can build its niche a little bit more away from Genshin. I think the longevity of the game will heavily rely on how well it can maintain its multiplayer community aspect and refreshing endgame content, of course, and that's something that we'll see unfold over time. Genshin has had 2 years to solidify their dominance already. So for this game to thrive, it doesn't have to dethrone Genshin. It just has to offer something different enough to keep players happy, and I'll be looking forward to that. If you have thoughts about Tower of Fantasy so far, if you've been trying it, I would love to know how you feel about it in the comments down below. But hopefully this gave you an insight to how I am feeling about the game currently. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!